Good afternoon, everybody. I'm the ELIXIR Head of Operations here at the ELIXIR Hub in Hingston. And the purpose of today's webinar is really to talk about ELIXIR operations, especially referring to the ELIXIR Handbook of Operations. There is a slide in the end to point you to the handbook. But I would also really welcome questions. So this is meant to be a webinar that is useful for everybody who is on the call. So any questions, please put them on the Slido or and let us know. And I'm happy to talk about other things as well than what I have on the slides around ELIXIR operations. Now, let's get started. So let me see, there we go. So the first slide here, I added here the ELIXIR timeline. So how did ELIXIR come about? When did we start and where are we now? The ELIXIR infrastructure was launched in 2014, just before 2014. And from 2014 onwards, we started our first scientific program, which is for 5 years. So ELIXIR operates in these 5-year cycles. And then that first 5-year program finished in 2019. We started our second scientific program, which is now then scheduled to finish in 23. So that gives you a little bit of the kind of the time span of how ELIXIR got established and how did we develop the infrastructure. I'm not going to spend any more time on this time, but do if you have any questions, please do add to the Slido. Now, at first, I'm going to talk a bit about the ELIXIR legal structure, the ELIXIR foundation, and the ELIXIR governance. That's the first part of the talk. ELIXIR is founded through a legal treaty that established ELIXIR. It is an intergovernmental agreement, intergovernmental treaty, and it's called the ELIXIR Consortium Agreement. And you might be hearing about an ECA, the ECA in ELIXIR. So that is the ELIXIR Consortium Agreement. It is the agreement is signed by the country members of ELIXIR, the 21 countries, and EMBL, who is also a member of ELIXIR. The first 5 countries signed the ECA in December 2013. And 1 month after the 5th signature, it came into force. So officially, ELIXIR legally existed from January 2014. So a quick calculation, we will be celebrating the 10 years of ELIXIR in just a little while forward. As mentioned, the ELIXIR is a consortium of countries and EMBL. And based on the ECA that defines the constitution of ELIXIR, it defines that ELIXIR is legally part of EMBL, and I'll come back to that. But ELIXIR has separate members, governance, operations, and the budget. And I guess I will spell out EMBL here as well. I'm assuming that everybody will know what EMBL means. So EMBL is the European Molecular Biology Laboratory, which is another intergovernmental organization that was founded, I think, 40 years now. It has the headquarters is in Heidelberg in Germany, and then it has outstations elsewhere in Europe. And that's maybe a note for us for future slides on these to add a link to that as well. So that is the foundational document of ELIXIR, the ELIXIR ECA. And the way ELIXIR was founded, the way the ECA was established, it really allowed for rapid establishment of ELIXIR as an infrastructure. And I'll talk a bit more about that when I describe the role of EMBL, and I'll kind of refer to back then why it enabled us to establish ELIXIR more quickly. This is the slide we usually have to show who are the members of ELIXIR. So as I mentioned, there are 21 countries and EMBL who are members in ELIXIR. So that means those countries have signed and ratified the ELIXIR Consortium Agreement. And then we have one observer in ELIXIR, which is Cyprus, which means the observer is a country who has not yet signed and ratified the ECA. This is a quick introduction to the terminology around ELIXIR nodes. We'll talk more about ELIXIR nodes later, but just to mention that in each country, there is an ELIXIR node, and they are very diverse, as you can imagine in Europe, in all the different countries. The nodes are typically distributed, like ELIXIR is distributed entity, and they bring together universities and research institutes, sometimes industry in that country. And the services that are run by the nodes, they reflect the national priorities, bioinformatics and other life science priorities in the country. And the ELIXIR nodes, they are very diverse and varied. So there is differences in the maturity of the nodes, the size of the nodes, the scientific focus of the nodes, and all the different aspects. I started the talk by talking about the intergovernmental treaty, the first legal agreement that is fundamental for the existence of ELIXIR. There is a second legal agreement that is fundamental for the existence of ELIXIR as well. And this is called the Node Collaboration Agreement. This Node Collaboration Agreement is the next step. So at first we have countries to sign the ECA. And then the next step is to form this Node Collaboration Agreement, which is the bilateral agreement between a node and then the ELIXIR hub. So if you look at the picture here, you could imagine that the blue circle here is kind of the ECA, the international treaty that brings together the ELIXIR infrastructure. And then inside that, each node, which are these circles here at the outer side, then there is this bilateral agreement between the node in the country and the ELIXIR hub. This collaboration agreement is really important because it defines what is inside ELIXIR and what's outside. So the collaboration agreement defines the institutes that are members of the node who are then partners in ELIXIR. So this is a really key document for us. And it also forms the basis of all the operations of ELIXIR, for example, commission services, but many other things as well. So it is really kind of the operational legal agreement that is really, really important for us. And there is a graph there at the bottom of the page that shows the kind of the timeline when we were able to establish these bilateral agreements. So 2019 was the great year that we were able to conclude the final collaboration agreements, and we were able to have a fully established ELIXIR infrastructure so that we have a legal link to all of our nodes. So that was the second important kind of operational legal agreement that we have in ELIXIR that really enables the infrastructure to function. So the ECA was the intergovernmental agreement, and then this node collaboration agreement is the bilateral operational agreement between the hub and the nodes. I'm going to make a small pause here and see if David, are there any questions? That's fine. That's great. So please do put any questions on the Slido, and obviously we can discuss afterwards as well. So that was the first part of the talk around the legal agreements and how ELIXIR was founded and what's kind of fundamental there. I thought to spend just a little bit of time talking about ELIXIR governance groups. This is very important for us because the governance of ELIXIR allows us to function. It allows us to take decisions. It allows us to set a direction. It allows the infrastructure to be reviewed. So it's very, very important to have a good governance in ELIXIR. And we have a very simple governance structure, which is also important. It's a functional and simple governance structure. There is the ELIXIR board that is here in the center. I'll talk about a bit more about the roles of the different entities on this next slide as well. But the board is the decision-taking body. They take all the decisions in ELIXIR. We have the ELIXIR director, who is appointed by the ELIXIR board, and the director has the responsibility and the mandate from the ELIXIR board to operate, to execute the decisions taken by the ELIXIR board and operate and really implement the infrastructure. Another key governance group in ELIXIR is the Heads of Nodes Committee. So every node has appointed 1 or 2 individuals to be the heads of their node or head of their node, and they are all eminent, scientifically eminent individuals across ELIXIR, and therefore they bring with themselves a lot of expertise around scientific and technical topics. And the Heads of Nodes Committee is really important to help the director to set the direction of ELIXIR. It's a key role for them. And then there are 2 advisory bodies, and I'll talk about them a bit more on the next slide. So let's look at the roles of the governance groups again a bit in slightly more detail. So I mentioned the ELIXIR board, ultimate decision taker in ELIXIR. The board it consists of members, delegates from each of the ELIXIR countries. The countries can appoint 2 to 3 members to the ELIXIR board who meet twice a year to take the decisions that need to be taken, for example, around budget, the ELIXIR program, accounts, any other relevant topics that need decision by the board. I mentioned the heads of nodes committee. So these are the heads of the ELIXIR nodes. They are scientific experts and have been positioned by the nodes to represent the node in ELIXIR. And the heads of nodes committee is really key in developing and agreeing the ELIXIR scientific and technical strategy. And the heads of nodes committee meets 4 times a year. Then the 2 advisory bodies. So the scientific advisory board is our independent international scientific advisory board, who has members that have been invited and appointed by the ELIXIR board. And they meet with ELIXIR twice a year to review the scientific direction of ELIXIR. And then there is the industry advisory committee, who comes together, I think 2-3 times a year to give advice to ELIXIR on what specifically would be the needs from industry on the services that ELIXIR provides, or on the strategy that ELIXIR is developing, or any other aspects around the technical and the scientific topics. I think I'm going to have a small pause again. Any questions that have come up? No, that's good. Great. Then let's talk a little bit about the role of EMBL in ELIXIR. So as I mentioned in the beginning, EMBL is a member in ELIXIR. That means that EMBL can send its delegates to the ELIXIR board, can participate in the decision taking of the ELIXIR board, and EMBL has 1 vote like any other member of the ELIXIR consortium. So that's one of 3 roles that EMBL has in ELIXIR. The second role that EMBL has is the host of the ELIXIR hub. And this is kind of maybe an operational role. It's for EMBL to provide the services that are essential for the operation and management of the ELIXIR hub. So for example, employing the staff, procurement, HR, finance, some IT services as well for the ELIXIR hub staff. And in addition to this role of providing the services that we need for the daily function of the hub, EMBL also provides the legal personality for ELIXIR. So ELIXIR is borrowing EMBL's legal personality. So whenever ELIXIR hub or ELIXIR infrastructure enters into a legal agreement, it will be signed as EMBL as part of and as mandated by the ELIXIR consortium. So examples around this could be that, for example, node collaboration agreement that I referred to, the bilateral agreement, it's signed between ELIXIR hub and the node, but what it says legally in the text, it says that it's signed by EMBL as part of and as mandated by the ELIXIR consortium. So that's kind of the second role of EMBL. And when I described in the first slides, and I said that the ECA allowed ELIXIR to establish itself quite rapidly. So it was quite important in the beginning of ELIXIR when we were able to use the services provided by EMBL, for example, hiring staff or procurement or legal services back then. We didn't have to establish everything from nothing, but we were able to use existing services because of the way that the ELIXIR consortium agreement is defined. And that was really, really beneficial in the beginning. And it really gave us a quick, rapid way to establish the infrastructure. So those were the 2 roles. So the first role is EMBL as the member and as part of the ELIXIR board. The second role, EMBL as the host of the ELIXIR hub and providing these daily essential services. And then the third role of EMBL is to be an ELIXIR node. And this is mainly through EMBL EBI, but also through EMBL Heidelberg. And as a node in ELIXIR, EMBL is a node like any other node. There is no difference whether we have the Swedish node or the EMBL node. From the hub point of view, from the ELIXIR point of view, it's the same as anybody else. If you're interested, there's a link on the slides, and we'll make the slides available But actually, in the end, I'll also point you to the Handbook of Operations. All of these links that are provided in these slides, they are all available from the Handbook of Operations. So you can access all of this information whenever you need it. Any questions, any feedback? That's great. Let's continue. One additional thing that comes from the role of EMBL in ELIXIR is the data protection in ELIXIR. So because we are legally part of EMBL, we are following EMBL's data protection scheme. I will not go into any detail about the data protection scheme in this talk, but I am really, really happy to highlight a brand new brand new website or a web page on the ELIXIR website. I really encourage you to all to take a look at it. It's really great, and it explains in quite a good detail what is the data protection in ELIXIR and how it might come about in our activities. So do take a look. It's a great website, and it's really up to date, brand new from our side. So do take a look. All right, then this starts kind of the second or third part of the talk, which is around ELIXIR operations and how do we implement ELIXIR. So we have talked about the legal structure and the legal foundational structure. We have talked about the governance of ELIXIR. How do we take decisions, how it all comes together. We have talked about the role of EMBL in ELIXIR. So now we're ready to move on to kind of the operational bits and the implementation of the infrastructure. And I mentioned in the first slide that ELIXIR operates on these 5-year cycles. So we are currently towards the end of our second scientific program. And we have started to develop the third scientific program. And this scientific program sets out the ELIXIR plans, the scientific strategy for 5 years. And then each year of those 5 years, we have the annual cycle of defining our annual work plan and budget. And if you remember, Heads of Nodes Committee was the key governance committee to establish ELIXIR's scientific strategy. So the scientific program and the annual work plans and budget, they are all developed by the Heads of Nodes and the platforms and the individuals in ELIXIR platforms. And then all of these documents are approved by the ELIXIR board. The annual work plan and budget is always approved in the autumn of the year of the next year, the autumn before the year that it starts. In addition of these annual cycles, we have our commission services. We'll talk about them a bit more in the coming slides. And these commission services are then also approved by the ELIXIR board, and they are defined in these documents, the scientific program and the annual work plan. And then there are two other areas how to implement ELIXIR. It's the EU-funded projects that we have, and then national activities. And I'm going to go to the next slide to talk a bit more how the ELIXIR infrastructure is funded. So this is an image to capture the different ways of how ELIXIR is funded, and ELIXIR as a whole. So not just the hub, but also the nodes. And if we start from this corner, the ELIXIR hub here is defined in orange. So how is the ELIXIR hub funded? We get the internal funding, as we call it. It is the annual contribution by ELIXIR members. So each ELIXIR member pays an annual contribution fee to the ELIXIR budget. In addition, the ELIXIR hub is funded from externally funded projects, the EU projects or IMI projects, Horizon Europe and IHI nowadays projects. So that's the way ELIXIR hub is funded. Now, if we think of ELIXIR hub, and I mentioned the commission services, so that's a way the ELIXIR hub then provides, I think about 50% of the funding of the internal funding goes to the ELIXIR nodes as commission services. So that's one direction of funding, how it goes in ELIXIR. The other way that nodes are funded is through the external funding. So EU project funding goes also directly to the ELIXIR nodes, as this arrow up here points out. And then finally, the nodes, all of them are also funded nationally through various different ways. There's roadmap funding, there's competitive research grants, EU structural funds, and industry collaborations and other different sources of funding for the ELIXIR nodes. So that's how ELIXIR is funded in a nutshell. Now, any questions? No, we're all good. Thank you. Then let's move on. So that was the implementation, high-level implementations of ELIXIR and the funding of ELIXIR. So let's talk about ELIXIR's operational structure. We have this image on the right that many of you will have seen. There is the definition of ELIXIR platforms and ELIXIR communities. So ELIXIR platforms are entities that we define in 5 different areas. There is the compute, data, interoperability tools, and training platforms. These platforms collate our services from our nodes. These platforms are really the place where we bring together the services that our nodes provide and find ways for them to be interoperable, work together, and connect them together. And then these, and I can see that we need to update the slide as well. I didn't realize to update it because we have 13 communities. So then on the outer circle here in the image, we have our communities, which come together in specific life science areas. So they are the toxicology, galaxy, microbiome, biotechnology communities, for example. So the idea of the communities is to bring together the experts in those specific areas to look at standards, services, or training, whatever the needs are in that specific scientific area. And it also then is a way for people in that specific community or that domain then to find a way to work together with the ELIXIR platform. So it's a way to connect these 2 circles together as well. So that's the ELIXIR operational structure. And I'll talk, there's a bit more detail here. And this is talking about this now, I realize this could be a whole presentation on its own to talk about more about ELIXIR platforms and communities. So the ELIXIR platforms, as mentioned, they bring together services from ELIXIR nodes. Their platforms have really existed from the beginning of ELIXIR. They have been there for many, many years already. At the moment, we are funding the platforms in a 5-year funding cycle in the first and the second program. And these platforms are led by scientific experts from ELIXIR nodes, and there's a formal selection process. It's called our platform excos. Then if we look at the communities, this is a bit more recent creation in ELIXIR. We started communities in 2018. There is a formal process that goes through the Heads of Nodes Committee to establish a community. So they can't just appear, but they are established more formally in ELIXIR. The membership of communities is open, so even people who are not part of ELIXIR nodes can join the communities. The leadership of communities is restricted to ELIXIR node members, and the funding for communities is usually competitive. And then the last operational group that I'll mention here, I don't have any more slides about it, is the focus groups. This is the newest entity of our operational groups since 2020. And the focus groups are really meant to be informal groupings. There is oversight in establishing them, but it's not as formal as the communities process. And the membership is open for focus groups, and the leadership is restricted to node members. And the focus groups don't have ELIXIR funding allocated to them. Any questions?
We do have a question, actually.
Yeah.
ELIXIR has grown over almost the last 10 years to have 21 nodes, many institutes and projects, etc. Where do you see it going over the next 10 years? Good question. Brilliant question. That's great. Let's think about that. There is obviously 2 different ways of thinking about that, and it is based on the mission and the kind of the vision of ELIXIR. So one thing you could think about, well, we just want to keep on growing, right? The more the merrier. We could have more and more members. There are more countries in Europe who could join. There are specific rules in the ELIXIR governance and legal agreements on who can join ELIXIR. But we could decide that, okay, that is our goal. We need more members. But I think as we have grown ELIXIR to be now this 22 members, I think it has become quite clear that the only driver to, like there is no, ELIXIR's success doesn't depend on the number of members. So we shouldn't be growing just because we can grow.
but rather there should be a way of strategically deciding, who should join or who can join and all so forth. And I think another key aspect here is that, okay, ELIXIR is a European infrastructure. Should we try to engage more beyond Europe? How should we look at that? And there was a consultation and webinars earlier this year around this topic led by Corinne Martin from the ELIXIR Hub. That is ongoing. The discussions there are ongoing. It's not fully settled because it is part of the development of the 24-28 program. But again, I think there as well, the idea is that, yes, we can grow, but if we were to grow, it needs to be driven for the strategic reasons from the strategic drivers, not just by thinking that, okay, the larger the number of members, the better. So I would see ELIXIR probably will grow a little bit more. There are a few more European countries that are interested in joining and who would like to join. So I'm sure there will be a few more members to join, but it's not going to be like dozens and dozens of countries joining. That's definitely not the case. And then obviously, as we develop the next program, it'll get crisper as well. How do we want to approach towards the non-European, the kind of international countries as we talk about them? Yeah.
We have a second question as well.
Excellent.
Does the funding for the platforms come from national funding and ELIXIR funding? And are the communities and focus groups funded?
Yes, excellent. Yes, actually, I'm gonna answer that question through this presentation, and then if it's not good enough answer, then we'll come back to it, because I think it'll probably give a bit of an answer when we talk about the commission services. So let's talk about the commission services. This is the next part of the implementation of ELIXIR. So a quick recap here. We discussed the collaboration agreement. I mentioned that this bilateral agreement with all ELIXIR nodes is really fundamental for the operations of ELIXIR, and it is. It enables us to do a lot of things inside a legal framework, and that's needed. The legal framework is needed when you do things across countries in Europe. So in ELIXIR, because of this legal framework and because of this heads of nodes committee that we have that sits and decides on ELIXIR's strategic direction, we are in principle in a position that the heads of nodes could have a meeting today and they could decide on a strategic project that would be really important to do. Let's say there's an emerging new area. The heads of nodes could meet and decide, this is important. We need to invest on this area starting from tomorrow. And they can agree. And then in principle, it takes 6 to 9 months to get the paperwork together, so that we could actually pay ELIXIR nodes to work on this important new area. But because of the way our contractual framework, the legal framework is set up, we allow pre-contractual work. It means that people could start to work tomorrow, and then we will pay them as soon as we get the paperwork together. And this is really, really, really powerful. It enables us to be, if needed, we can react with 22 members, with 21 countries and EMBL across Europe. We could react on a new emerging area and decide this is something where we need to look at. This is, there's a new standard that is needed. This is something that is happening. And we could start the work really quickly, put the best people we have to work on that, and then make sure that the paperwork is done in due time, and then pay the nodes for the work they do. And this is quite unique. This kind of framework doesn't really exist in many in other research infrastructures. Some other research infrastructures have it, but the scale that we're doing it is absolutely unique. So from the start of the ELIXIR existence, we have executed 470 agreements that enable us to pay the nodes for work that needs to be done. So the scale is quite big, and it is really, really the way we can react quickly if needed is really unique, and it's really powerful for ELIXIR. So that's the commission services. So let's talk a bit more about the commission services. So what I just referred to in that previous slide is our internal projects that are called commission services. And in the question, there was mentioned platform funding. It's one flavor of commission services. We also have community related funding. So there's the community led implementation studies, community support, And there is other ones like infrastructure service, strategy-driven implementation studies, and staff exchange program. Now, the question was, are the platforms funded through commission services or national funding? And I think we probably, we seed fund the platforms with the platform funding through the commission services, but we don't have a record, but I'm sure it happens that the nodes also invest funding into the work that supports the work of the platforms. We don't track that. So in principle, we fund the platforms from commission services, but I'm sure there is also contribution from nodes towards the work in platforms. Now, the community funding, that was a question around that as well. So I mentioned it is competitive usually. So every community, when it's formed, it gets one first project to integrate, implement, and work with the ELIXIR platforms, but that's just one project. And after that, the funding for communities is competitive, and that's through the community-led implementation studies. So those were the three funding categories. Then we have the infrastructure service funding category, which we only have one service in it at the moment. It's the ELIXIR AAI, the authentication and authorization infrastructure. And then the two last categories here, strategy-driven implementation studies. These are top-down projects that the ELIXIR heads of nodes would decide to be important to do. And this would be the category if we decided to fund something to start tomorrow. And then finally, the staff exchange program, which is a way for individuals in ELIXIR to come together and exchange knowledge. And yeah, there's been over 100 projects so far in the current program. It's a 16 million euro investment in the current program. So starting from 2019, all ELIXIR nodes are involved in these commission services, and the projects vary in length. And there's a link to the general guidelines. That's really important if you ever are participating in the commission services. It's important to take a look at the guidelines. They set out the rules, how the funding can be used. Let me check the next slide. And I think, let's talk about this, just the last slide, and then we'll make a pause. So the governance of commission services, I added this slide because it might be useful to think about how it all works. And as I just mentioned, ELIXIR has this unique system where the heads of nodes agree on the scope of the project and the funding allocation. And then we have in principle two different routes to do this. The one route is the left side, which is the competitive route. So I mentioned the community funding is always competitive. So about 18% of commission services funding is allocated through the left side, which is a competitive process. The nodes, they submit a project plan based on the scope that has been defined by the heads of nodes. These are evaluated by external peer review. And then there's a criteria that they are evaluated against. And then ELIXIR board approves once the selection has been taken and the project can be executed. So that's the competitive route of governance for commission services. And then we have the kind of the more common route, 80% of commission services funding is allocated, where the heads of nodes agree scope. They agree on the area where there needs to be an internal project, commission services project. They ask the platform or the strategic area leads to develop, or the community leads to develop a project plan. And then ELIXIR nodes are consulted on the plan and it's finalized, and then heads of nodes agree the plan is good, ready to be executed. The ELIXIR board approves. Again, ELIXIR board is the decision-taking body, so they approve, and then the project is ready to be executed. So it's a very short description of the two routes, how ELIXIR commissions funding works, commission services funding. So I'll pause there, David. Any questions? I hope I satisfactorily answered the question earlier. Now we are at the last part of the presentation to talk briefly about ELIXIR nodes. We've referred to the nodes a few times already in the presentation, and I thought I'll just do this kind of final summary recap a bit around the operations of ELIXIR nodes. So when a member has joined ELIXIR, so they have signed and ratified the ECA, so the intergovernmental agreement has been signed and ratified by a country. Then that country establishes a node by submitting a node application. So usually in that country, the research community around bioinformatics services comes together. They write a node application. It is sent to ELIXIR, and the ELIXIR Scientific Advisory Board reviews this application. And once the review is done and the review is submitted to the ELIXIR board approves the node application. So that's the first step of establishing the node. And this node application describes the node. It tells what the node plans to do and how they plan to establish themselves, what services they're going to bring and things like that. What is their scope? What is the scientific scope of the node? Once the ELIXIR board has approved the node application, then the node can start to work with the ELIXIR Hub to establish this bilateral agreement, this collaboration agreement. And this agreement, once it's concluded, it's approved by the ELIXIR board. And then once it's approved and signed, then a node exists. A node becomes part of ELIXIR. That's the creation of the node, the signing of the collaboration agreement. And then the third step for the node to become part of ELIXIR is to establish this service delivery plan. It's a document that describes the services that the node puts forward to ELIXIR. So it's another document to define what's in ELIXIR and what's not. So a node could have hundreds of services, but they will then have an internal process to decide which of those services they put forward to ELIXIR. And it's a key document in the sense to define what is in ELIXIR and what's outside, for example, for funding. So we can only fund through commission services, node services that are included into the service delivery plan, for example. So it's a way of defining the ELIXIR services, what is inside that pot. And I think, let me see, there we go. I'm going to go backwards a bit. So if you go to the ELIXIR website, there is a section called services, and you see this long list. There is hundreds of services already included in it. So this long list is really that list that is defined through the service delivery plans, and that defines what is inside the ELIXIR infrastructure in terms of bioinformatics services. So that's a key bit of establishing the node. Now, if we think of ELIXIR as an infrastructure, we need to have quality assurance processes inside the infrastructure to ensure that whatever we do, whatever we provide is fit for purpose and of good quality. So these different quality assurance processes, I've already spoke to two of them. So there is the node application that has been submitted by the node, and the ELIXIR Scientific Advisory Board reviews it. So that's one point of quality assurance. Then we have, when the node has been formed, we encourage every node to have their own independent scientific advisory board. And we encourage that this node scientific advisory board would review the node annually or biannually. Then each of the services that are included by the node into the ELIXIR infrastructure, we encourage those to be reviewed as well. It's very important that the services are reviewed by external independent experts who can provide really useful feedback. So that's a key part of it. And there are two ways a node can do that. The services can either be reviewed by the node scientific advisory board that the node has established, or sometimes when the service is very big and very important and very, very much used, they can have their own scientific advisory boards as well, like a service-based scientific advisory board. And then the last step of quality assurance of ELIXIR nodes in ELIXIR, we have the overall ELIXIR Scientific Advisory Board. So the board that is part of the overall ELIXIR governance, they review each ELIXIR node periodically. It's about once in 5 years, and provide feedback of the node in general. So these are kind of the different ways how we ensure the quality assurance processes in ELIXIR, and obviously, especially in terms of the nodes and the services that the nodes are providing. Now, last thing, I think we're really nearing to the end. So I will briefly mention another quality assurance mechanism we have in ELIXIR. So when the collaboration agreement, so the bilateral agreement between the ELIXIR Hub and the node is established, that agreement also establishes an entity called Collaboration Oversight Group, which is The members of each of these groups, there's one per each node, is the ELIXIR director and the head of node and any others that they have appointed. And there is an annual review. Oh, I wonder if my video, oh, there we were back, and my video paused for a bit. So there's an annual review via this collaboration oversight group. We conducted via a web form where we asked the node specific questions around the node status on finances, sustainability, the node services, the node funded services, the status of them, commission services, what is the status, how is it going, and of course capturing any future developments that the node might want to share with us. So that's another review process that we have for ELIXIR nodes. Now, this is really my penultimate slide. So this is kind of the 5 steps of the ELIXIR node. We started with the node application. We continued to the collaboration agreement, which is the operational bilateral agreement. We have the service delivery plan, which defines the services that are inside ELIXIR. That's really key. And then we have commission services. So these were the internal projects where the ELIXIR hub pays the nodes to do work that benefits ELIXIR infrastructure. And then the last bit of the node operations is the node review. So there is the annual review by the collaboration oversight group, and then there is the periodic review by the ELIXIR scientific advisory board. And I think that's my last slide. So taking you through all of this, all the information that I've said is in the ELIXIR handbook of operations. It is it's our handbook on all the guidelines, procedures, processes that you can think of in ELIXIR. We really welcome input from any of you if there is any need to improve any of the processes or add something that is not there, any area that is missing. We're really proud of this handbook of operations, very, very proud. It's been a lot of work to do it, and I think we get really positive feedback about it. And we also had an internal audit that was conducted in 2019. And they really acknowledge how we work transparently and how that is extremely useful. So we're really happy with that, and we want to continue with that and really welcome your feedback as well. So there's a link to the handbook of operations, and I'm really happy to say I think we have a new version, updated version as of today as well. So you will find that through our website, and we'll if you go to the website and you just put in the search box, you put handbook of operations, and you will be able to find it as well. I think that was my last slide. So any questions, anything to add at this point?
We don't have anything in the slide at this moment. If anybody has questions they would like to raise, now is a great opportunity. Absolutely. Just while people are thinking, we know things are going to change over the next 6 months within ELIXIR operations. Would you like to spell out briefly how you see things going to go?
Absolutely, yes. Yes, so there will be a change. We will have a new person starting as a ELIXIR head of operations this autumn, from September onwards. I will be handing over the ELIXIR operations at that point, and then finish my time in ELIXIR towards the end of the year. But I think it's a great opportunity, and I'm not worried at all, because we have, like I said, we have the handbook. We are quite well-established and mature organization. ELIXIR has existed nearly 10 years, and I think it's a good point in time as well to bring new people in and continue with the operations. So I think it's all going to go well. Okay.
Well, thank you very much. Haven't seen any new questions come in the last moment or two, so thank you for those who joined today. Thank you, Susanna, for your presentation, and we'll wish you all the best for this time next year. We look forward to seeing where you end up. But thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Bye-bye.